in global politics today. In some sense, how do you respond to, and since you are the one who has held the highest office of a country, I think it's fair to pose you the question that in a world which distrusts each other, where there are other tensions, how do you reach a agreement across such large number of countries to do something as intricate as you are suggesting? Because here we are really having to restructure some of the fundamental assumptions of the post-war order.
Well, again, I'll have to be true. My grandmother used to tell me, find a friend, be good to your friend, don't friend against someone else. That is your foreign policy. I can't see how we can be in agreement with everyone. That is why the UNFCCC has not been able to come up with an agreement on climate change, and this is the 20 odd years. The only thing they've done now, we have climate change conference children, because negotiators have met each other 24 times. I went to Poland, they had children. But we still don't have a solution. So my straight answer to you is that we can't agree with everyone. But let's find people who we agree with, and then let's work with them.
Okay, I think I like that idea. I'll come back and I'll ask you a few more questions on that. Let me turn to Anne Wilson, since he invoked the COP26. And in some sense, that has been a centerpiece of the UK international efforts in the past year. The Commonwealth, of course, most recently in Rwanda. How has UK in many ways assessed what needs to be done to respond to the imperative of green transitions, other efforts, and what are the challenges you think still remain and need to be addressed?
So, well, the UK had quite a climate-focused year last year. So, of course, COP26, also our G7 presidency, and most recently, we have been delighted to finally hand over the Commonwealth Chair in office. It's flown by. That at the CHOGM Summit, Rwanda, as a really strong ally and partner on climate, featured climate really heavily, and we saw a great side event. UK and Rwanda hosted side event on climate, and so I'd count that as one of the successes. You know, actually, over the last year, what we've shown is all of those different forums are important in their own way, are essential, but they're not enough. So yes, it's really essential that the G7 is continuing to focus on climate, and it was great to see G7 commitments last year, but that's not enough. Yes, it was great that we pulled everyone together at COP26, and there was a whole host of commitments. 7. We need to hold high-income countries accountable for their commitments and push them to be transparent on how they're delivering against those. But we also need a really strong African and Asian voice at COP27. And actually, you know, all of those forums, yes, we've played a heavy role, but that's not enough. And I really like the community as cavalry point, because, you know, any of these forums, it's essential we use them, including... I mean, so it's a really good question. So as I was saying, we need to hold high-income countries to account for their commitments. We need to follow through on that. We need to follow through at COP27 and beyond. But it's also the case that the big global climate funds aren't currently delivering for the most vulnerable countries. And so we need to push for streamlined processes, for reduced bureaucracy. We need to pick up the pace. And that's really important. And it's important we're doing that at capitals level. But as you said, there's two sides.
Can I say, can you give us just received one project, one funding from the Global Fund? Because it takes ages to get a project delivered. Can we swap the debt? So can it come to the budget instead of going into projects?
So really, because there's more to be done here, but also because Rwanda's got finance, and that is going towards the NDC implementation plan, and it is going on budget. And so yes, we need to be doing that too. And UK's been a strong supporter of that initiative. We helped Rwanda to establish the Green Fund. But even that's not enough. And then, I mean, the other element, of course, is the private sector. I mean, over half, I think, of all climate finance is coming from the private sector. That needs to be an angle too, and one we encourage.
So that's something that I will turn to Roland to respond to. But I'll just come to you. I want to ask you a final question. There's also this group G7, which has been talking about a climate club, climate alliance, the just transitions, And a number of buzzwords have come through that process. I really want to know, how is that going to invest with these private sector actors that Anne was mentioning, work with sovereign wealth funds, work with other big fund sources to be able to mobilize possibly the largest ever deployment of capital for green transitions. I think we have to do something that we have not done in the last 75 years. In the next 10 years, we'll have to put more capital in if we have to succeed to achieve our goals of net zero in various countries. Is the bank ready to be the leader in doing that?
Thank you so much for both of those questions, right? They're very important, and I agree with you with the sort of critical points that you're raising about needing to do something different. Your first question was about whether we're mobilizing and deploying capital. The bank got a capital increase in 2018, and one of the key discussion points around that stimulated that capital increase was climate. It was approximately $13 billion, and it permits the bank to deliver approximately $41 billion more annually between then and 2030. So yes, we're getting, there's money there. Another good example, we have the International Development Association, which is the most concessional resources that we have available. They just did a replenishment for IDA 20 and raised the most money that they were ever able to raise, $93 billion to be deployed over 3 years to the 74 poorest countries in the world. And in that space, and as the bank, we have made particular commitments that will ensure that at least 35% of the lending will be, or will have impact in terms of climate co-benefits. That changed, and that additional increase, how should I say, it was 28% maybe 3 years back, and this moving up actually occurred during COVID-19. So we were leveling up on ourselves at a time when the COVID projects were not necessarily those projects that had a very strong climate co-benefit element, right? So we're pushing ourselves. I think what the bank would tell you, bank corporate and multilateral institutions generally, are that even if we put all of our resources together as multilateral institutions and the ODA from bilateral resources, we can't meet the demand for development finance. And so that's why a very significant feature of what it is that we do is precisely what you talk about, which is crowding in resources. It was very nice, Honorable Excellency, that you mentioned the debt to nature swap from Belize. The bank was integral in that. The similar debt to environment swap or debt to environment, leveraging environment to raise resources for Seychelles to manage their debt was also, the bank was the leader there. So I think we are in fact putting ourselves forward. Many of us say, oh, it's the World Bank, you think of money. We think of knowledge and technical assistance, and I think that's where we do well. Rwanda is a very good example for us. So one of the many things that we're doing around the globe in addition to those is essentially capacitating governments to establish and improve their green investment facilities, these catalytic green investment facilities. And we're currently working on that using different types of instruments. We're doing this in collaboration with the Green Fund here, FONERWA, and the Development Bank to try to set up a facility to be able to manage green investments and to bring in and leverage more private sector investments. What was also interesting, I found, was your comment on there being lots of money available. It's true. And in fact, I remember a conversation that I had with the Minister of Finance when I first arrived, our very first conversation. He said, you know, Roland, there's money out there where people are getting 0%. And it's sitting in those banks, and we could handle it here. Like, how can the bank help us, right? So, as always, Rwanda is asking the right questions. And it's interesting because subsequently, I've had a number of interventions with our headquarters who are actually trying to figure out what kind of facility the bank might be able to develop. I don't think it's only the World Bank. I think similarly UN agencies and others are trying to think this through, where we could unlock this private sector capital that generally, in countries like Canada and others, where the, how should I say, the investment rules are quite modest. They're not risky, right? Because it's people's pensions that you're dealing with. And so to say to them, you would go and invest in emerging markets is somewhat scary. So the bank has experience working in these emerging markets. And we know about dealing with financing. What could we do to essentially allow us to have access to those resources, and also to create the projects in the countries that would be viable projects to finance? It's not very easy because our typical counterparts are governments. And right now, the collaboration, the people who are part of the discussion, Sweden, Canada, number of very large pension funds in some of these critical places. But all I can say to you is that the conversation is ongoing. This is something that we care about, we see as an opportunity, and we're looking to see how we could use our experience and knowledge to try to bridge that gap for the countries that need it most.
Thank you. No, you raised a very interesting point, Roland. In fact, I was talking to one of the largest insurance funds in Europe, and one of the C-suite, one of the board members was mentioning that we make these big announcements about shifting our portfolio to green. We disappoint ourselves and others, not because of any other reason, but there is not enough capacity in our institutions in Europe to make the correct investments in the emerging world.
Absolutely.
Now, is the World Bank thinking of building capacity in Europe? Sometimes I say it tongue in cheek, that please take the $100 billion and build capacity in Europe to make the right investment decisions. The problem is not Rwanda or India or Maldives. The problem is that you don't know how to assess risk in a world where climate change should be your biggest risk factor. So is there a conversation on building capacity in the rich countries to make the right investment decisions?
I don't know exactly all of the elements of the facility and how they'll go about it. But I think that this is the role that the bank can play, because we understand how to work in these emerging countries. We have persons on the ground, we understand the local risk and the considerations associated therewith. And so how that money will move, if it, for example, were to move through the bank were able to maybe guarantee a particular return, yes, then we would see what those investments and projects could be like. So I'm not speaking out of turn in that I've said we're thinking about it, they're working on it, right? There are whole sets of very fancy, extremely bright people doing that. But I think the good point is we see the opportunity, and we're trying to see how the bank can play a catalytic role there.
So, Usta, I have to come to you because all roads lead to Rwanda if we need to respond to a climate challenge. So how are you positioning yourself? And I want to actually ask you this question that many of us are grappling with in other parts of the developing world. SDGs, green transitions. How do you manage both of these imperatives? Some say that actually they're co-beneficiaries. So if you invest green, you benefit in your SDG agenda as well. So how is Rwanda imagining its green transition in this context? And of course, where is your money coming from? Right? Of course, World Bank is one, clearly, we have an enthusiastic supporter here. But besides the World Bank, where else is the money coming from?
Well, thank you very much. It's on. As earlier said, I think development has had its own trajectory. And of course, this trajectory hasn't been balanced. So many of the developed countries have developed on cheap, and I say that very conservatively, on cheap carbon intensive approaches. But that had never been cheap. We are all paying the cost now. So that journey has not been fair in itself. And we still all live the consequences of the unfairness. A few weeks ago, last week, in Iraq, they declared in many parts of the country a work-free day. People were not able to come to work because of the heat waves. Now, if you compared it with UK, many of the people in the UK were able to work and have the production of the day because they had ACs in their working offices. So I don't want us to feel like that is something of the past. I think it's also that trajectory of development still affects all of us today. But you asked how has Rwanda done it. I think there are certain things that you cannot easily change now. But if you take responsibility of your development and use the opportunities that are there, and I think it all depends on sustainable development is for us as individuals, and you said that earlier. Surviving as individuals is part of the government's responsibility, but core commitment. So we cannot develop except if we develop together. And that is a perception, that is a conviction, that is a strategic orientation that this country has at the beginning. So I should say that how we have done it is putting our citizens at the center. You know, a few years ago, we decided that this country was going to be carbon-free bags, and we made that commitment to ourselves. And the first element of how we do that is the trust in leadership between the people and the leadership. When we take this as a partnership, when it threatens our existence, all of us, I think, and that's what the globe has to really learn. When something threatens our existence, all of us, we should confront it collectively. It doesn't mean we don't have differences, but I like really this dialogue, because for us, dialogue has been the basic of everything we've done. Anything, we spoke about genocide against Tutsi, which was the most painful element, but we spoke about it in our own communities. And through that, we were able to devise solutions from ourselves. So it's also how we develop. If we are going to develop together, we have to be intentionally pursuing our togetherness on these challenges that affect us. Secondly, I think it's accountability. If we have chosen policies, if we have chosen strategies, we also establish mechanisms of assessing them. So in the Rwanda Governance Scorecard that my institution issues every year, we have a climate resilience aspect. It is the least performing in many ways, but we've worked with the Ministry of Environment, we've worked with REMA to identify the areas of assessment. And they take it unapologetically that we measure that. So we are also able to measure what we do, and that allows us to use effectively our resources. And therefore, I would say that is the core element. Now, back to the element of togetherness. I think partnership makes sense on the ways we do things. Sometimes we spend so much on the things we don't agree with our partners and don't deliver. But when we start with what we agree, then we will also be able to deliver on the things we don't agree on. Or we will also learn who will agree with us on something differently. So it would be okay for the UK not to agree with us on this particular element. When India agrees, we are going to go with India on that. And I think that's what I said earlier. We don't have to get a collective agreement. We have to define our priorities and choose the partners. So it doesn't mean that when we agree with India on some element, we never agree with the UK. We need all of them as partners. So those are the areas that we engage in.
Sometimes the UK, just for the record.
Sometimes we leave the UK. So how do we, I think, where do we get our money? First of all, I don't think everything to address the climate, it has to do with money. We have car-free days.
Correct.
You know, we have had those moments of car-free days. Nobody uses their car at a given amount of time. And we know we are reducing carbon emission with that. Mm-hmm. We have community-based work. So we have a lot of local initiatives, and that's what I want to add. It's a local initiative, so bringing communities on board, mm-hmm. allowing communities to adjust to systems that make sense for them.
Yeah, that's okay.
That makes sense for them is, I think, putting together something that we will all be able to identify is key. We have accepted certain initiatives that have worked somewhere else. Electric cars are a priority that we are looking at. When we delivered the program, most of the public transport that was used then was electric cars. So we have to be also able to unlearn and relearn. And I think that's a core element. Now, where do we get our money? So I'm starting from where we get our money. We get some of our activities free of money. When you put communities together, I think there's a particular direction I have to go to.
Yeah.
Now, being one-stop center is very hard to know where to put the microphone. We bring the resilience of communities.
What I'll do is
as
I'll
a
stand
core.
here so that we are looking in the same direction.
Okay, when we do the community resilience aspect, it's a core element. We bring our money from our national budget, but also, as earlier said, we know that it's important that countries on this side also create systems and policies that are trusted. So when we built the green fund, when the National Bank invested in choosing not to go the carbon way and investing in renewable energy, when the Development Bank chose that direction, we are also taking responsibility of creating systems that are resilient in themselves, but those systems can only become resilient if they are owned locally as well, accepting partnership in a way that you want it to deliver, and thirdly, being efficient and accountable to the resources. Now, there are so many other things that will happen around the resource discussion, but I think also when you build those systems, money will come. Because the money will trust that it will be used for what it is supposed to be used. And that's probably one way that we do it, ensuring that...
So better use of money, more accountable use of money. Let me ask you one more dimension. And this is, in some sense, being part of a union, the African Union, yet being a relatively small country in terms of population and in terms of market size. How important are collectives to negotiate for larger financial flows as well as technical support that was just mentioned by the previous speaker? Do you see a role for teaming up with other countries to raise money collectively?
Well, in Rwanda, we believe in partnerships, as I said, and we don't just go to the partnership. Our president has once said that if you are not on the table, you are the menu, and we choose not to be the menu. It's an intentional choice not to be the menu, but collectively, we are a small country, as you said. When we begin with the entire African Union, we are speaking of a bigger market. But we are also conscious that we are interdependent. Correct. So what we do, if we do we've been fighting malaria. I'll just give an example. We've been fighting malaria, but the more we fight malaria, when our neighbors are not doing the same, the inputs we put in do not yield what we are expecting. So that connectivity really is something that we cannot undermine. You know, when we were here in Chogam, the heads of states in their communique looked at climate change as a priority, and also they intentionally, part of the communique, declared that under a rule-based structure, they will continue working with all these multilaterals. So I think what really expanding yourself and working with greater markets, with greater forces, is the way to go. It's really about togetherness. In the end, for us, it's pursuing togetherness for the things that collectively threaten us. Each African country is going to be a small market. But when we get together as an African structure, we become a bigger market. And everyone else has done that. You know, the development of the European Union has really founded itself on that. So there is that greater benefit of the greater size. So we are in the African Union, small geographically, but not small in mind. We have chosen not to be small in mind, but we bring still the pursuit of finding common ground, common development trajectories, and holding ourselves accountable in that project, in that process and journey.
So I'm going to pose the same question to the other panelists, and I'm going to also alert you that I will take some questions now from any one of you who wants to jump into this debate. I don't have a clock. I think we started at 6:20, and I will take that to be my cue in terms of the hour. But we will bring you in at this time, so you can think of a question that you can ask this fantastic panel, and I can see Sujeev, and I can see Rohit, and I can see many others who would want to jump in. But let me ask you the same question, President Nasheed. Working as a collective, you were talking to me about the 4 island nations in the Indian Ocean. But let me ask you a question. Why is it that something like the Commonwealth, and I believe you're going to be signing some partnership on that very soon during your visit to Kigali, Why is it that an organization like the Commonwealth, which has the most sophisticated financial services center like London, obviously the Australians now are back in the game with the new government and they are committing to the green agenda. Canada and Canadian pension funds are all over, for example, in India, building and investing in infrastructure projects. And of course, the market size and population sizes that Commonwealth possesses. Why is it that something like the Commonwealth or for example, the Indian Ocean associations that are, that proliferate that particular part, why are these organizations not competent enough to create the finances that you need?
Well, I think she was far more diplomatic in saying, please don't steal. Don't steal the money that you get.
Correct.
So money comes when you stop stealing it, to start with. The Commonwealth doesn't have a bank. And it really doesn't have any means of any way of assisting another country. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it has very good cultural programs and discussion programs and so on. But so far, the Commonwealth has no actual ability to meaningfully assist a country. Mm-hmm. We like it. We like sitting around together and having these discussions every year. It's very good, but the Commonwealth needs a bank. Now, she also said how to get the money is you need, for instance, if you want to get renewable energy money, I am told you need feed-in tariff systems. Mm-hmm. You need the legislations for that. Mm-hmm. So therefore, you need a parliament. Mm-hmm. So you need power purchasing agreements. So you need a kind of a set of infrastructure or set of legislations.
Soft infrastructure.
Yeah, legislations that would allow other institutions to be able to plug into your thing. Mm-hmm. So we really need to develop the plug. No, they have the plug. We need the plug point. Mm-hmm. So in one sense, I think that's what she's saying. But then also, if she would underwrite coups, one of the reasons why we don't get money is the minute someone gives us money, the government changes, we terminate the contract, and the guy loses the money. So no one is going to come with more money. So if the bank, and we've asked, I'm in conversation with the bank.
So can you give, instead of just the money guarantee, can you give a political guarantee to the
can you give 12, can you underwrite, we will give 12%, can you underwrite the agreement?
No, for sure. I love it when you ask me these questions because I can say yes.
No, but you haven't.
No, we have an institution called MIGA.
Look, that's right.
That gives political risk insurance.
Yes.
And it is precisely there
for this purpose,
to make environments that are not as stable as we would like feel more comfortable to investors. I, of course, didn't want to cut you, Excellency, so please continue.
No, you've got it right. That's what we wanted. We wanted to see someone
do we need like a mega MIGA, which can actually one of the ideas, I heard someone wise telling me that instead of the rich countries giving $100 billion to the developing world, they should put it into this very large MIGA fund so that commercial capital can be assured and deployed at scale to the geographies that currently they fear, the investors fear. So is that something that we should be thinking about?
I think we should be thinking of that. And also, when we talk about energy, you would have to understand that these powerhouses in all our countries were built before the countries. Mm-hmm. Now, Sri Lanka Electricity Board, Maldives Electricity Board, they are older than the country. So they are very reluctant to change. And we forget about the labor transition of what would happen to the fellow who is
working in the coal sector.
Or everyone who is in the fuel industry, and what would happen to them and how we transit them to the new industry. So I think...
but there's enough material that's something that the countries are thinking about. Let me turn to Ronald and ask you a question that you may not like to answer. Like, for example, are you seeing today, and being someone who's been in the bank, are you seeing a greater appetite for reforms being undertaken at the recipient end, at the countries who need capital? Are you seeing there's greater willingness now to be open to change so that they are able to receive money? That's number one. And two, are we seeing a tendency for countries to work together, to tap into pools of money that may be available?
This is also a question I like, because I feel that the answer to that one is yes. There is the climate, COVID and other pandemics, the conflict has pushed very strongly against countries, increasing significantly their need for resources. And so even if they might have been slightly reluctant before to work on certain reforms, they're now saying, what do we need to do in order to be able to have resources? But more importantly than that, I think with the very significant increase, the cacophony around climate, countries are not just saying, I will do what is needed to get money. They're saying, we recognize we have an urgent problem to fix. How can you help us fix that? And so, yes, some of that is policy reform because you're creating an enabling environment, you're creating a particular space. I go back to a point that I made earlier, that maybe one of the binding constraints as well is actually the projects. That countries are saying, we have a challenge, right? Hurricanes come every year. They, decimate with multiples of GDP. They wipe out X or Y. We want to fix that, but we don't really know how to do that. Can you help us design projects and programs that will attract the private investment, or that where through a small amount of, government capital or capital that you get through a multilateral, you're able to leverage more. So there is that issue as well around not just the policy reforms, but helping, supporting governments with projects, with actual, the way in, the way to get the investments to be able to address the challenges that they had. You asked a second question.
And can I say something on that? Please. The bank has given the Maldives 196 designs of island harbors, and that has ruined 196 islands. Now, these designs are Second World War designs in the Pacific, American designs for these little islands, and the bank suddenly, technical assistance meant imposing these designs in the Maldives, and that stopped sand migration around the islands, and therefore more erosion. So actually, I would also suggest to think about your technical assistance in this new environment that we are seeing. Don't go to your designs that's left in your desks. It's there, it's been there for ages. Find new ones.
So that's a criticism of the process and how it needs to be improved, but not of the process. Not of the process. My second question was on countries beginning to see the usefulness of aggregating. So the creating a community of nations and negotiating with big piles of money.
I think that two things happened when COVID. I liked your presentation very much. I think, it's pushing us to think, around the fact that we moved away from multilateralism. But I think two things happened. I think while there are some leaders that said, I need to secure my people, my country, there were many other leaders who I believe became more strident about the impact. So rather than be neutral, you had to pick a side, right? Institutions like ours, like the bank, we realize the importance of countries working together. And we actually have a number of different, how should I say, incentives. For example, IDA, which is the most highly concessional, if you're doing a regional IDA project, you actually get a sort of 2-to-1 match. 1% of, one part of your resources with 2 parts of other resources that you would not have been able to leverage otherwise. Because we know that there is value in coming together to design, for example, mutual power plants. We have a number of those here in Rwanda, to think about regional trade, transport, etc. And so I do believe that there are countries like Rwanda and others who are gathering, who are pulling countries together to say, you know, in this East African community, let's bring in DRC. We see the value of a larger group around the AFCFTA. Rwanda, even though it's a small country, has been a significant sort of igniter, fire starter, saying, look, guys, this is important for us. Please pay attention. And you see that happening. You see similar movements. I was in Indonesia before with the Indonesian government that's now in charge of the G20, right? Trying to make those arguments about the importance of multilateralism and the role that multilateral institutions should play. It doesn't mean that they don't have criticism for us. We can always improve, for sure. But they know the value. There are certain things that would not have happened without the bank, for example. In COVID-19, I say this because I am proud of it, over 15 months we were able to loan $150 billion to respond to COVID, but to deal with many other things. This was a significant push. We've never done this before. And without a bank, the countries that receive those resources would not have received those resources. So there is value. It's not perfect. We can always improve, but there is value in these institutions. And you are seeing that move.
And most importantly, all of us witnessed a sign of life. There was agility there.
Yes.
You know, normally if you want to kill a project, you would go to the bank. Now actually we saw agility and nimbleness, which was, and let me turn to you. You know, that's the Commonwealth challenge that President Nasheed has tossed towards you. That's his question, that how do we take the Commonwealth and make it something worthwhile? I think that's a fair question to ask, that we have 50, you know, head of states, head of governments, foreign ministers meeting every year. We have communiques that talk ambition. Now, why don't we have frameworks that convert those ambitions into tangible outcomes? Is it time to rethink the purpose and design of the Commonwealth and perhaps start putting some teeth into the cultural club that President Nasheed was referring to? That's his question. I have no say in it.
You might have expanded on it.
A little bit. That's my English education. That's not me. Otherwise, I would have been brief. Go ahead.
So the Commonwealth is its member states. So it's a third of the population of the world. It's a hugely diverse set of member states, and I think that's its value, in that it's got high-income countries, it's got some of the most vulnerable climate-affected countries in the world, including Rwanda, who, as we've said, is kind of leading the charge, and at all of these tables, being a champion for some of the most vulnerable states. I think, you know, that's its value. The Commonwealth is what member states make it, and happily, as we've been saying, all roads lead to Rwanda at the moment.
So one of the ideas for all of you to consider is to take the 5 largest states by GDP in the Commonwealth, and I won't name them, we know who they are, and ask them all to contribute, say $250 million each, and put together a green adaptation or resilience fund, and get technologies to start using that money to come up with solutions for tomorrow. And I don't think all member states need to do this, only 5 need to do this, and they can call it the Commonwealth Green Transitions Fund. So just an idea, and it's free of charge. Okay, we are going to go to, sorry sir, I interrupted you.
I said the Commonwealth Enterprise Forum, Lord Mahanan, has an outfit that is trying to move there.
Okay, good. See, someone has stolen my idea. So you still get it. Okay, so I have number of hands here. Okay, so the rule is that can we take 3 together and then come back to the panel? Brief introduction as to who you are and the institution and affiliation, and the question. Okay, and for discussions and commentaries, we have an excellent dinner venue, and we will do it there. This is for posing a question to the fantastic panelists, or a brief comment if you have one. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm called Alphonse Mref. I come from the University of Rwanda. And my question is to where is money? And I want to suggest something that I think people have taken to be controversial. And that is, science has shown that it is the developed nations that had made the significant contribution to the emissions. And my suggestion is, why have we not moved strongly the discussion of distributing the damage to these nations and apply the principle of international law,
climate reparations. His question is
of state responsibility, and that will help us, not these countries that are contributing to the fund fearing that they are being so nice. If you want to be nice, then you can make extra contribution, but at the moment, repair the harm that you have caused.
Climate reparations as an instrument. Please, we'll go here.
Thank you very much, panelists. My name is Grace Akelo from Uganda. I am very much interested in this issue of partnerships and connectivity, and especially coming from my colleagues in Rwanda. So I want to, first of all, thank you for opening the borders. Because Uganda was in this tight situation whereby we are asking why are neighbors closing borders when, at a time like this, when we need to build the East African community. And
is there a question?
Yes.
This dynamic I'm familiar with. I know a little bit of this. We have a neighbor also next to us in our place that I come from.
Yes.
So I know this dynamic.
I think this dynamic is important, and I want to really thank Rwanda for really walking the talk, because we can talk the talk, but we need to walk the talk, and opening the border and really talking this East African community thing is very important to us.
Thank you. My name is Andrew from Ghana. I also wanted to just make a comment on, I think you mentioned that it's also important we develop the capacity of the developed countries in seeing what exactly a green project is, because sometimes it's not so clear. It's not, if it's not a solar project or a clear adaptation project, it's not considered as a green project. And I'll give an example in Ghana where we are trying to transition from heavy fuel to liquefied gas. That is not considered green, but for us, that can form as a base load to put on renewable energy so that we can have some sort of reliability when it comes to electricity. So yes.
So what is green? How do you define green? Shifting, you know, EU will define it very differently today than it did 1 year ago, for example. So the shifting definitions of green. Good question. And there. Okay, I'll take this question and the last one from you, and then I'll turn back to the panelists. We are running out of time, I'm told. So we will give everyone a chance to respond to that. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Dominic. I'm from Ivory Coast, and I live and based in Ghana since 4 years. I have a question since 3 years, and I think today is the day to ask the question. There is that country in the world. The debt is around $2 billion or more than this, located somewhere in the Caribbean that we used to call the poorest country in the world. Every year we put all money together, but the nature destroys this country. Is there any possibility the world can propose to those brothers to transform these lands into a natural reserve for the benefits of the world, themselves, and at the end of the day, we are all winners? Can we go to those crazy ideas to typically change the dynamic?
A good question. And the final intervention this evening, the lady at the back. Sujeev, you want to come in as well? A short question? Okay, I'll come to you, Sujeev. So first to you and then to Sujeev.
Thank you very much. My name is Desta Lako, and I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. I work with Amref Health Africa, and it's a pleasure to hear everyone speaking here. And my question actually is very specifically around COP26, 27, if I can say, coming up. So we've seen how climate change has significantly impacted human health, and yet in tremendous ways, whether it's food security, whether it's vector-borne or waterborne illnesses, very, very significant impact on human health. And I'm wondering when and I say COP26, I know you've handed over, but if there's somebody there that can talk to it, how can we put human health at the center of climate change mitigation, resilience, and adaptation efforts?
Good question. And Sujeev, final question to you this evening.
Thank you. I'm Sujeev Shakya. I'm Chair Nepal Economic Forum. A comment and a question. In terms of the comment, I'm not batting here for World Bank, but in Nepal, we are one of the most climate vulnerable countries, and there is an initiative that has begun in the coordination of the bank, the Green, Resilient, Inclusive Development, where the government, the private sector, everybody is coming together. So there are lessons to learn from how we can work together. The question is that for any of the panelists to answer is that when we are talking about green growth, itself is an oxymoron. Because we don't want growth. We want reduction, we want recycling, we want minimalism to start also. So how do we look at green growth as an oxymoron term and how we relook into it.
So
Thank
that's
you.
a dinner table conversation. That's the larger philosophy, green and growth. But if someone has some nice short response to it, otherwise, I can promise you that the panel this evening, post-dinner, where Jenny and others are going to be discussing the stories and narratives of the world today, I'm sure the question of growth will be discussed. But anyone who wants a short answer can? That's not me. Anne, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. I'll just say a couple of things. I'm probably going to not cover all the questions, even though I was taking notes. Firstly, on COP and COP27, clearly what we're looking for is a really strong, coordinated African voice at COP, as well as an Asian voice, sort of real coalitions across the globe. I think the pre-meet's in DRC. I say all that to kind of channel some of those questions and channel some of those energies, including the one around finance. You know, sort of I've made points up front around, you know, needing to both ensure countries meet their financial commitments and are transparent and report on those, but also push others to do more. But I think we welcome, you know, other voices and other suggestions, both at that pre-meet and at COP27. So that was one point. Just on development capacity of vulnerable countries, I think and this links to some of the comments that were made earlier as well around technical assistance and the appropriateness of technical assistance. I think what's been really great to see here, I keep praising Rwanda, but we're a really strong partner. But I mean, you talked a lot around getting the systems and the governance and the plans straight and being accountable for that funding. It's also really nice to see the efforts to be a bit demand-led on technical assistance. Which I think is recognising at this point that sometimes technical assistance is too supply driven and it needs to be appropriate and it needs to be aligned with the NDC. I suppose just final point on NDC, which links to one of the questions. You know, there's a note on all of us to go away and make those more ambitious and keep doing that, but we equally fully recognise that gas, for example, may be part of a country's transition plan, as long as it's aligned with the NDC and you know, a sustainable green transition. Well, so I was kind of fudging that with my talk
Okay.
of look towards COP27. Let's make sure there's a really strong African voice and other voices there, including at the pre-meet.
Okay, go ahead.
I felt that many of these questions weren't directly coming to the bank, so I was very happy about that. But I did want to make a point which has been made by almost everybody on the panel today and maybe not stressed enough by me. I think that we can talk a lot and we need to talk a lot about the provision of resources, about leverage, all of those good things in terms of being able to afford. But there's another piece which is having the institutions on the ground that are then able to take it up. Maybe not going so far as stealing or corruption, but very simply being sufficiently robust, right? First having a plan, a strategy, and then being sufficiently robust and focused on execution. And I think sometimes that is what we see, that we get money, you know, we put it at the feet, and maybe it's not stolen, but the implementation is either too slow or taking too late, or so you're not seeing the impact on the ground, you're not seeing the impact for the beneficiary. So I think countries really need to focus on that as well, building institutions to enable the actual transition that we are looking for.
And of course, there was someone who made a pitch for the grid framework.
Yes.
Is that something that is now finding takers in this part of the world?
Most certainly. The grid, we're speaking to green, resilient, and inclusive development. Every now and again, the bank prepares these sort of large flagship publications that sort of said, this is how we see the world now, and this is the direction in which we want to go. And it's really linking all of those things. The green, the resilience, the people, the inclusion is important. And it's at the center, for example, of financing around the IDA 20. I mentioned there will be $93 million that would be spent among the 74 poorest countries over the next 3 years. And that is the actual base of that, right? Looking more, for the first time, we're introducing strongly human capital, which was not there before, right? That people-centered development, but also very strongly linked to climate. So yes, there is uptake. In some respects, we can't help but there being uptake because it's how we're framing the dialogue. And there's definitely interest from countries who recognize, not just because the banking's saying it, but because they can see what is happening on the ground, that they need to also pay attention to all of these dimensions.
President Nasheed?
One of the questions were on loss and damage. One thing that we have to understand and believe is that they did not produce the internal combustion engine to murder us. The idea was betterment, prosperity, better life. The idea was penicillin. But much later we found that this was actually a killer. And after having understood that, and then not recognizing is a crime. One reason why we are unable to find an agreement on loss and damage is because of UNFCCC goes with the idea that everyone in the world has to agree on these things for it to be a convention agreement. So they're looking at the lowest common denominator. For instance, Rwanda and Maldives agreed, and then suddenly Ghana came and said, we don't agree. So what the UNFCCC is trying to do is reduce our ambition to the Ghana's ambition. So at the end, there is no point of an agreement. So an alliance, a coalition of the willing, not try to get everyone agreeing on everything, I think would be a way forward. So why did we close the borders? Because WHO didn't quite understand what was going on, and we were trying to have policies on zero loss of life, which was really quite impossible thing to do. We already have armies that we pay to kill. And so a policy of zero loss of life is really not quite going to work, and they didn't know, none of us actually knew. But if we had gone back to the Spanish flu and tried to understand the historical facts around that time, perhaps we would have been better. So is OECD, what is a green project? Someone told me if you build a school and then have a solar panel on top of it, the whole projects become green. No, it doesn't work like that. OECD calculation of their contribution to climate change is calculated on these terms. Can health be the center of climate mitigation efforts? Well, health can be and should be, but there are also, I would like to make the reefs the center. Someone else would like to make the rainforest the center. Others would want to make health the center. Of course, it should be a center.
But I think there is a point there. I think the point that was being made was, for example, air pollution, right? That's a very similar action is required for climate mitigation and air pollution. And air pollution in the emerging world is a big...
In the same manner, if you don't protect the reef, we also die.
True. That's also health. So in some sense, I think the point here is that you have to put certain activities along with climate action. That's the point that was being made. Final word to you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the question that Grace raised on the appreciation of the opening of borders. And I want to put this in a very brief context. While Rwanda benefits and enjoys partnerships, it must be citizen-centered. And by the time of closing of the borders just before COVID, initially one border was under reconstruction, but there was a major risk for Rwandans moving from this country to Uganda. We've had so many detained. We have had a number of them life lost. And when we are compromised on the protection of our citizens, as a country that has suffered a genocide, we are very conscious on protecting our citizens. We can afford to reduce everything else to the security of our people. And I think when the leaders agreed and assured people of protections, I think the borders opened. But then, of course, COVID came in, and COVID expanded the structure in itself. So I think at the core of that is citizen protection. And I mentioned it earlier, why would rule have cooperation, engagement, and we know that even when we disagree, it is not for forever. We believe in dialogue and consensus, and eventually we get where we're going. You know, we had the La Francophonie, but at some point we asked France to leave this country. So I am not arrogantly saying that, but I'm saying that the moment you define your leadership on citizen-centeredness, you will do everything else to protect their citizens. You will find alternatives of what that protection takes away, but you will do everything else that you're required to do and protect your citizens. And I think Rwanda was in absolute belief that there was a need to protect our citizens. If you cross to bring onions, but you die, you would rather be without onions or find somewhere else to get onions. So I think really putting it in perspective, that was the initiation. But as you celebrate, we also celebrate. We have so many Rwandans across this region. But you will all know that Rwandaphones sometimes are very threatened in this region. You know, we know what is happening in Congo. A lot of Rwandaphone killings are happening, and we are watching that on the media. So we have known that existential challenge also, and I think we cannot afford to look at it as if it's anything. One person lost in this country is too much loss, because we've lost too many. And I think we have invested in our security, in our resources, to say we'll do anything to protect. You know, we got COVID vaccines so very fast because of the same philosophy. You know, when everything was still everyone was still doubting the efficiency of vaccines, so many people are still doubting, we went for the vaccines. And I'm glad that because we went for the vaccines, we are able to open ourselves. We are able to go back and live our lives. And it's not an isolated approach. The same approach we used then to protect our citizens is the same approach we are using in dealing with COVID, in dealing with climate change. Putting the citizens at the center is a core element. May I also end on reparations?
Yeah, reparations.
I don't want to disagree with Mlefu, but I think knowing the history that we have come from as a country, if we had over-labored on reparations, some damages are not repairable actually. I wish we could move ahead. If we are moving ahead collectively, so if you asked me, I would first pursue collectively to say, let's start with a clean slate. We have struggled over climate change. We have all lost. Can we do something that makes all of us safe? And then when we are all safe, we can hold accountable one another. But now I think we still have really existential challenges. And those existential challenges, in one way or the other, kind of prohibit us from moving on, agreeing collectively on the same future. So I would say, well, that's a good idea, but it will be the legal processes, it can be self-defeating itself.
So I think that's a good note to end this fantastic panel discussion. Work together, walk collectively, find solutions, and once you have found those, then start blaming each other. I think that's also the plan for this evening. But before we proceed with this evening, please join me in applauding this fantastic set of speakers. What we will do now